From deep within the undrained Republican-filled swamps of Florida, this is the KrassenCast, defending what's left, with hosts Brian and Ed Krassenstein.
Welcome to KrassenCast. Before we get into the show, I just want to remind everyone that we are now available on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, and just about every other podcast provider out there. Just last week, we had Vicky Ward, the author of a new book, Kushner Inc., on this show. The book's selling like crazy right now, I'm told. The last I checked, it was number 4 on the New York Times best-selling list. So last week, Vicky spoke to us a lot about Kushner's apparent corruption, and she enlightened us to some behind-the-scenes fiascos involving both Ivanka and Jared. As new information keeps coming to light, and Jared's role in the Middle East and regarding his security clearance comes to light, we've rushed to get her back on the show and talk further and get more details on what she's finding out. Welcome back, Vicky.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian.
So what you found out recently, talking to your sources regarding Kushner's actions in the Middle East, particularly Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Can you enlighten us on some of the details?
Yeah, and you sort of bear with me here, right? Because it is a little complicated for listeners to follow. But the essential thrust of it is that Jared Kushner has been running around the Middle East using it as a sort of private casino to solve his very real financial problems. So you have to remember that Jared went into this administration with a financial albatross around his neck. This building, 666 Fifth Avenue in New York, a building that was bleeding money. No American investors would touch it, with a 50-foot pole. And the Kushners had until February 2019 to offload it somehow. And it became increasingly unclear how they were going to do it. What I reported in the book, and we talked about last time, Brian, was how Jared Kushner started sort of playing off various countries in the Middle East against each other. We know that he swiped the Middle East portfolio from under Secretary of State Rex Tillerson's nose, and then communicated with MBS, future Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, MBZ, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and the Qataris, without letting Rex Tillerson or anyone on the National Security Council know exactly what he was talking about. Extremely dangerous, unbelievable, unprecedented abuse of protocols. We also know that Rex Tillerson, a lot of senior people in the State Department, Defense Department, and National Security Councils were extremely concerned as to what Jared Kushner's motives might be in pushing for the first US official visit abroad to be to Saudi Arabia, not a country with shared democratic values. What could that be? Could it all be to do with money? If you remember, the summit, as we discussed, theme of it was supposed to be all about cooperation in the Gulf, fighting terrorism. But 10 days after the summit, to Rex Tillerson's astonishment and horror, and to James Mattis, Defense Secretary's astonishment and horror, they discovered that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and Bahrain, in fact, turned around and blockaded Qatar, a neighboring country with whom they've long had a rivalry. Qatar has Al Jazeera, the closest thing the region has to a free press. It's very, very rich, much richer than Saudi Arabia. It also shares a gas field with Iran, but most importantly, it houses an American airbase. So threatening Qatar is the same as threatening the United States. Rex Tillerson and James Mattis knew that the Saudis would never have dared threaten a country that with an American airbase unless they'd had a green light from someone in the White House, Jared, and that person was Jared Kushner. Now, what's new, what I have discovered since the book came out, as various people have reached out to me, is this. In the spring, in April, of 2017, Charles Kushner, Jared's father, lined up at the St. Regis Hotel in New York, and when the Qatari finance minister was in town. The Qatari finance minister had long known Charles Kushner, took the meeting as a courtesy. Charles Kushner asked for $1 billion, according to someone in that meeting to whom I have spoken. The Qataris turned Charles Kushner down because the deal was a bad deal. What I have learnt is that in the ensuing month, before the US visit to Riyadh, Jared Kushner got on a plane and flew to Doha, the Qatari capital, and he reamed the Qatari ruling family, the Al Thanis, for not doing the deal with his father. Absolutely reamed them. They began to feel that he was indirectly threatening their sovereignty. The next thing they know, they show up to the summit in Riyadh. The Emir, the ruler of Qatar, arrives with an entourage, but his entourage is suddenly cut off from him and not allowed into the summit at the same time by the Saudis, which he felt was a move to deliberately make him look weak. Now you have to remember, during this summit, Jared and Ivanka go off for a cozy, secret, unmonitored dinner with MBS. Nobody knows what they talked about. 10 days later, when, to the horror of Tillerson and Mattis, the United States supports this blockade of Qatar, what the Qataris found was not just a blockade. There were Saudi and Emirati troops on their border. What they interpreted this as was Jared Kushner basically saying, if you don't pay my father, pay off this building, look what's going to happen. The Americans are going to sanction an invasion of your country. Sources in the State Department say, yes, it is true, troops were on the border. And 9 months later, just follow the sequence of events here. 9 months later, late spring of 2018, a Canadian company, Brookfield Partners, whose largest outside shareholder is the Qatari Investment Authority. They own $1.8 billion of that fund, by far the largest outside shareholder. It should be noted that the Saudis and the Emiratis are also limited partners, but that's nothing like as much money as the Qataris have in Brookfield. They bail out the Kushner building, and they bail it out in a deal that makes absolutely no economic sense. They do a 99-year lease, and they pay the entire 99-year lease up front. You don't need to be good at math. You don't need to be in the New York real estate community to understand how crazy that is. And let us not forget that the Kushners, in addition to this building hemorrhaging money, the Kushners had serious tax liabilities on it when the building came due. And this deal is not only sort of madness from a math point of view, it's clearly done to accommodate the Kushners' tax requirements. So when you stand back and you look at the geopolitics, and at the same time as this deal gets done, the US withdraws its support of the blockade of Qatar. Okay, as so many people, as I say in the book, it stinks. Charlie Kushner says in the book, is quoted as saying, I always had the Qataris in my back pocket. And by the way, it should be noted that it's not the first deal that the Qataris have done in this administration with the Kushners that's incredibly bad. Brookfield did a deal, partnered with the Kushners on the Monmouth Mall in New Jersey. You know, I happen to live not far away. That project is a disaster. Why does a foreign company with Qatari money do two incredibly bad investments? And you'll notice the concomitant shifts in the US foreign policy towards this country.
So this, to me, this sounds a lot like extortion. Are you implying that, or?
Well, I think it does sound a lot like extortion. I mean, I think, you know, this is a story. I'm on it, and I'm going to stay on it. I think this is like the first part of, and there is more to come. But Brian, look at what happened yesterday on Capitol Hill. The not only was Jared called in for questioning by the Senate Intel Committee, right? And we know that whatever that was about, it wasn't because he wasn't getting White House Employee of the Month award, right? But then in the afternoon, the House Intel Committee sends him a letter wanting to know what happened in February when he went to visit MBS in Riyadh. And if you read that letter, what's really startling about it is the amount of information we don't know about Jared's, I call it diplomacy in the dark. They don't know where he stayed in Riyadh. They don't know who he met with. They have no idea of who he talked with on WhatsApp or on his phone. They have absolutely, you know, there is no transparency into any of his foreign dealings. And this is a guy who every single security agency has said should not have a security clearance because he's malleable precisely because of his financial issues.
So I just want to back up and just recap. Charles Kushner was looking for money. He met with the Qatari foreign minister. He got rejected. Finance minister. He got rejected. Then months later, Saudi.
Then within a month, Jared flies to Qatar. Again, we have no reports of this. There are no records of this. Amazing. We should know if the person who's running our foreign policy, we should know what he's doing and where he's going.
And then the Saudis blockade the Qataris, and
the Qataris notice, oh, look, we've got military troops on our border. They're a tiny, tiny country, a very, very rich, tiny, tiny country. The Saudis at the moment, you know, there's brutal war in Yemen that the US have finally had the courage to stand up and say, you know, they're not going to support, has cost them money. Oil prices for a while were down. You know that the Saudis, I mean, MBS has been over here courting America for investment because in 20 years, Saudi Arabia is going to run out of oil. The Qataris are much richer, and MBS, among other things, would like access to their resources. It's, you know, what he found was actually the Qataris were able to withstand this blockade. They didn't invade. There was no military action, not least because Rex Tillerson rushed to the region to try and diffuse the situation. But a few months later, what does MBS do? He gets another visit, cloak and dagger visit from Jared Kushner. They stay up till 4 a.m. Nobody has any idea what they talked about, but it's been reported, and my sources support this, that Jared handed over US classified information to MBS. So MBS, where does he get money from this time? He gets money from the ruling Saudis. He rounds up 6 of the 7 ruling families in Saudi Arabia. The only branch that he doesn't round up and imprison in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel and demand money from is his own family. Rex Tillerson says to Jared Kushner, Jared, have you noticed that the only family MBS has not rounded up is his own? Don't you think it is statistically unlikely that branch is the only branch that is not corrupt. But Jared didn't want to know. His response to that was to fire Rex Tillerson. I mean, this is what Jared does. Someone gets in his way, he fires them.
Yeah, so that order came down from Kushner, not really Trump then. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes. I mean, Donald Trump, I say in the book, initially tweeted his support of the blockade of Qatar, but he had no idea we had an air base there. When he learned that, he would come to change his mind.
Well, I remember when this happened, and everybody's like, "Why are we supporting this blockade? This doesn't make sense from."
No, and what since my book came out on March 19th, a lot of people, I had a lot of sources in the Middle East, but they've more of them have come out because I think that we in America have misunderstood and how dangerous this is, and what was explained to me is that this is a region where somebody like Jared, without experience and with all his financial baggage, can go and have a conversation sort of like the one you and I are having right now. But the ramifications of that conversation literally could lead to invasion. There are different stakes. The whole framework is different. And the idea that you have someone in their late 30s whose only training is that he was groomed to inherit a family business that's got real financial problems is now solo, running round, trying to make money for himself. I mean, it's just, it defies belief.
What's your opinion as far as how this pits the various nations in the Middle East against each other? Because if Kushner's supporting the Qataris, how does Saudi Arabia feel about that?
Yeah. So I have a chapter in the book called The Double Dipper. So rather famously, we learnt through some hacked emails of some sort of minor players in this whole thing who were trying to, it's all about money, right? The Middle East. Everyone's trying to make money off each other. So the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, who's his mentor, MBZ, privately referred to Jared as a clown prince, somebody who would, a pawn that they could manipulate in their schemes against Qatar. But once they discovered that he was now trying to do a deal with Qatar, they called him the Double Dipper. It meant that he was totally transactional and open for business with the highest bidder. It didn't mean they were going to stop doing business with him, but they had their eyes open.
So how does Trump feel about this? Is he aware of all this stuff that Kushner's doing, or is he kind of left in the dark about it?
Look, I do know that Trump was very fed up. Do you remember when, near the beginning of the administration, Jared Kushner appeared and there was a photograph of him in a button-down shirt and a Brooks, like a navy blazer, with a flak jacket over the top. He was with the Joint Chief of Staff, Chairman Joe Dunsford, and then Jimmy Fallon mocked him on Saturday Night Live. And Trump was absolutely livid about that. He'd had no idea that Jared was in the Middle East, and he doesn't like it when anyone connected to him makes him look foolish. And you'll notice he hasn't said a word about my book. And that's because the book is not really about him. He is not going to stand up and tweet in defense of Jared and Ivanka. And I think it's going to be very interesting now to see, now that the House is demanding some accountability and transparency from Jared. They do have subpoena power. We know that Robert Mueller gave some of his findings in the Middle East over to the Southern District of New York and possibly the New York Attorney General. It's going to be very interesting to see how long Trump protects Jared. We know that his daughter finds it very difficult to say no to his daughter, but But increasingly, Jared and Ivanka are just a giant political obstacle to him.
So there's no new indictments in the Mueller investigation. Do you think that Mueller handed off these probes into Kushner's ties to the Middle East and his lies on security clearance forms to other jurisdictions?
Yes, I know that he did. My reporting in the book really shows that Trump's legal team were well aware that Mueller, for example, evidence from somebody like George Nader, the Lebanese businessman who lives in UAE, the middleman, who was frog marched off a plane when he landed in the US. He's at the heart of all this Middle Eastern business dealing. And so information from people like him would have very little bearing on Russia and Russian collusion. And absolutely, Robert Mueller told the various lawyers who needed to know that he would be farming that out. They're aware of that.
Do you feel there's any connection to Russia in all this? Does Russia have a say in the Middle East with UAE and the Saudis?
So that's a really interesting question. What I think you can really see in my book is that the grand master of all of this wheeling and dealing and policy making is Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli premier, who is a very, very old friend of the Kushners. Remember, he stayed in Jared's room overnight when Charles Kushner had him to speak 4 times in their hometown of Livingston, New Jersey. And Jared plays a role in really sort of forcing Trump to meet with Bibi, Trump sort of felt that they were 2 alpha males. He was slightly competitive with Netanyahu, was reluctant to meet him too soon, but they did meet in the September of the transition. And Bibi gave Trump a masterclass. It was described by Steve Bannon, was in that meeting too, about the geopolitics of the entire region. And I think so. The softening of the US towards Russia was something that Bibi Netanyahu pushed for. Why? Because after Obama signed the Iran nuclear accord, Bibi's priorities shifted. The Palestinian question was no longer his chief concern, which is why he for the first time, he struck what's called a grand bargain, a sort of soft alliance with the Saudis and with the Emiratis, because they were all united in fighting a war, fighting their main enemy in the region, Iran. And Bibi believes that if the Americans ease up on Russia, Russia will help get the Iranians out of Syria. I have to tell you, I quote Bruce Riedel, former CIA expert at Brookings, among other experts on this in the book. No one, well, not no one, but most American analysts thinks that this is fantasy by Bibi Netanyahu. But I think it's really worth remembering that the grand chess master over all of this is Netanyahu, who, remember, is up for election on April 9th, facing really big charges of corruption. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. He's known as the cat with 9 lives, but I don't know if he can get through this one.
Okay, so do you feel that Qatar wants this to be known? Do you feel that they want this to get out there? Are they working with Kushner, or do you feel they're working and Kushner is kind of pressuring them and making them feel as if they're being extorted? Do you feel it's a quid pro quo, or do you feel it's a extortion attempt?
I think everything in this region is really tricky. I think the Qataris probably want it out there, but they don't want their fingerprints on it, because that would be dangerous to them. I think they're genuinely afraid of Jared Kushner, so they don't want to be associated with getting the story out there. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, look, they think their sovereignty is under threat, and Jared's behind it. So, and they want that to end. I mean, they're a small kingdom. We've got Saudi Arabia on one side and a big ocean on the other.
You say that you're working on this story to kind of get things out there. Is there documentation that you think will come out that will prove this either that this extortion attempt by Kushner or a quid pro quo?
I have heard that there is many people closer in to both Brookfield and to the Middle East have also heard that there is. So let's watch this space, Brian.
Well, good. I hope that you're able to find the evidence that's going to show America what's happening here.
That would be obviously very, very important.
Well, I thank you for joining us, and I hope to have you on again soon as you look further into this. Once again, to our listeners, I highly recommend her book, Vicky's book, Kushner Inc. It's now available on Amazon, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for the time.
It's always interesting to have Vicky Ward on our show. She provides so much insight that is not known to the general public. It's going to be interesting to see and hear what she comes up with next. I'd just like to remind everyone to please subscribe to KrassenCast on iTunes, YouTube, and Google Play, and please leave us a review if you would like. Thanks again, and talk to you next time.